start with some really amazing news in West Cumbria. You might have seen yesterday the Arts Council announced its investment in a range of places up and down the country, which will be creative people and places programmes. We already have one in Barrow. Barrow Culture is exactly that. And now there's going to be one in West Cumbria, which is incredible. It's a big investment in West Cumbria. And it's all about creating cultural and creative programmes from the bottom up, if you like, from communities, with communities, out of communities, rather than anybody in my kind of role, saying what people want to see. So it's an enormous piece of news in West Cumbria. There's much more to come on that, and we'll be getting people on in the new year to explain what it means. But it's great news. And back to you, Tom.
Okay, all right. Well, let's kick off. And even more important, perhaps this morning, to say that if you need captions for this call, as ever, if you go to the bottom of your screen, I think it's the 3 dots that say more, there's the option to show subtitles, which amazingly live with the magic of AI, it live subtitles even my slightly wishy-washy, sort of vaguely Dorset Southern accent. It can even pick that up as well. So if you want to show subtitles, then just press that button. But let me introduce you to Caroline Howsley, who's the manager of Cumbria Deaf Association. It's a year today, I think, Caroline, you said.
1 year today.
Since you took up that position at that esteemed organisation. Now you're based in Kendal, and it's fantastic to have you with us, because I think where disability, hard of hearing, deafness, and the arts and culture crossover is potentially frequently and often, in fact, one could even argue always, and yet I'm not sure that we often pause to think about where we are all at in our minds about how we can make sure that every part of the community can access the arts and culture of Cumbria. So we might explore a little bit of that in our discussion this morning. So I think we'll have a chat for about perhaps 15 minutes or so, and then a chance for people to pick up and ask questions. Do feel free to put stuff into chat if you prefer it that way, and I'll try and spot it and pull that into the conversation as well. But Caroline, can I ask you first of all, just tell us a little bit about yourself and sort of your story, if I can put it like that, as to how you've ended up doing what you're doing.
Absolutely. Like many of us, my path is long and varied, and seems to be getting longer and more varied as I get older. And I'm absolutely delighted that that is the way. When I was 10, I went to bed one night just with a bit of a cold, sore throat, woke up in the middle of the night, both my eardrums had burst, I had a massive infection, and it was quite gory and horrific. So I have to be careful what audience I tell that to, because if I go into a school and explain that to them, they're all worried that they're going to go to bed and wake up in the middle of the night with their ears gushing with pus and blood and everything. So I try and keep it real. At that point, I lost my hearing in both ears, so I became double deaf. And I refused to go to the local deaf school, because at that point, as with many things to do with disabilities, culture and attitudes has changed over the years, and it continues to change. And I'm sure Annie will back me up on this, that attitudes have been changing for the better, but there's still a long way to go in supporting people with disabilities in accessing all that they would want. So I refused to go to the deaf school, and I went to mainstream school and found ways to cope and adapt to my learning style. So I read everything. I got the syllabus before anyone else had seen it for the term, and I read up everything I could. This is back in the days of good old-fashioned libraries, where you go in and read books. There was no Google, no nothing. And for those who are old enough, you remember the old reel-to-reel tapes playing when you were doing language lessons? Well, I used to sit at the front of the class and put my hands on the desk so I could feel the vibration and lip read the tutor as this was all going on. And that's how I managed to learn French and Italian. I also spent a lot of time in Holland, and I learned Dutch out there as well, because I was purely going off mouth pattern. And you didn't realise you're doing it. You adapt so well, so quickly, you make it happen. Thankfully, into my mid-20s, I regained some hearing in my left ear. So I've got about 20% hearing in my left ear, but it varies on the weather, the environment, etc. So I went into a career, and it took me a long time to be able to ask, can you show me where I'd be working, please? Because different offices have different acoustics. And if I was going to be on the phone a lot, I'd need to be in an office on my own. But when you're sort of 18, 19, you don't really have the confidence to put yourself forward and ask these things. So career went revenue and customs debt collector, bailiff, international credit controller and doing debt collection globally, then moved to Cumbria, started my own business doing consultancy and debt collection, and then life changed a bit, and I went to work for the Calvert Trust at Keswick, bringing in my my hidden disability to be able to support others and really get involved. And I was the manager at the centre there. Then went to work as a care manager, and then parish centre manager in Ambleside through COVID last year. And then this advert came up, and it really just struck a chord. It was just one of those things. I went, I've got to apply for this. And I'm so glad that I did, because it means that my lived experience and the challenges that I've faced through life, but also the skills I've been able to learn as well. It's not negative. There's some really good things that I've been able to develop. I've been able to share those and start spreading the message about deafness is a spectrum like anything else. You know, we understand now that autism is a spectrum. No person's dementia is the same. Everyone's diabetes is different. And it's trying to get that message that deafness has different ways it affects people differently. And that's really so important. That's what we're trying to get as an organisation out there, and get the community talking to us as well about what they want, what their aspirations are. So being able to talk to you guys today is fantastic.
And just so we're clear, so are you lip reading basically a lot of what I'm saying to you now?
Yes.
Okay, so that's pretty clever to be able to do that through a screen, I imagine, as well. And obviously masks must have been a nightmare for people that lip read.
Oh, they're absolutely terrible, but I also use split screen. So I have half of you on screen and half of you on another, which is when my eyes keep flitting. So I have to use a larger screen as well, but then it means I can actually see you all in sort of normalish size.
Okay. I'm just conscious that you've got a history and debt collection as well. It's just playing in the back of my mind.
Well, I can help with that as well. That's absolutely fine.
Okay. So the Cumbria Deaf Association, I'll be honest with you, I didn't really know. So actually, no, I put on a play in my village hall about 3 years ago called Loudness is Not the Only, what was it called? Loudness is Not the Only Something. And it was a great piece of, it was kind of modern dance, but also a lot of drama as well.
Yeah.
And I remember trying to engage the deaf community, thinking people that are hard of hearing or deaf might appreciate this. And I got one or two people to come along, and I had someone who signed throughout the whole performance, etc. But I didn't really know much about the Cumbria Deaf Association. But I have noticed, possibly through your work, Caroline, that the social media presence has ramped up a lot in the last 6 months. Which is good to see. So what's the Cumbria Deaf Association all about, and what are your objectives? What are you trying to achieve?
Right, objectives are simple. We just want to keep having that conversation with everyone. We want, it's like anything. You ask the individuals what they need, they will tell you they are the best experts of their own lives. But we're trying to bring that together to help organisations and artists and performers to be able to understand, when you're planning events, how you can think about it. I'm also talking to architects about the architecture of buildings. There's a great sort of trend for large vacuous buildings with sort of dull industrial style lighting, but it creates too much of an echo. So people with hard of hearing, it's difficult to hear, so you end up lip reading, but then there's low light, so you can't see what people are saying. And we're trying to encourage hospitality venues to have a quiet corner that's well lit, where the acoustics are reduced, maybe with carpeting on the floor and with high back seats to create a buffer, so there's not echoes coming from all over. So it's all these small adjustments that we're trying to explain, that actually, if you do some planning, it can make life so much easier. And also sometimes, I was just going to say, it also helps some people on the autistic spectrum as well, because it's removing another sensory overload, sensory stimulation.
So Louder is Not Always Clear, it was the name of the piece.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chris. It's a beautiful piece of theatre and dance, which I commend to anybody. What's Cumbria like for people who are hard of hearing or deaf? Paint a picture for what it's like. Are there any good examples?
Well, what when I went out before we came on this call, I've been asking since September what people want, and they say it varies where you are. And they say actually Carlisle's not brilliant, but the likes of Keswick and West Coast are great, including deaf community and hard of hearing. So there's work to do in Barrow, so I'll be catching up with Danielle at some point. And just talking to people about even festivals, street festivals, what's going on, poetry, even galleries. I went to Windermere Jetty, we were talking about, and said that their exhibitions, because they've got the high ceilings and everything, the acoustics are awful and you can't hear what's going on. And the vision boards, whatever they call them, the information boards, are in formal English. So look, someone who's born profoundly deaf does not have English in their head. They've never heard the spoken word. So this jumble of letters is a picture to them. It means nothing almost. You learn to spell because you match words. So you'll see a green exit sign and you picture then anything green in a box with 4 letters could be the word exit, and then that's what you assume, but you don't know how that word sounds or anything. So when doing some artwork, it needs to be simplified, or it needs to be visual, tactile, sensory simulation in another way, because words do not exist for some deaf people. And for others, like myself, my language stopped at 10 for a while, but obviously I'd read quite well. My mother dragged me through reading books from a very young age. But my language stopped at 10 years old. It was only as I grew older that I was able to pick up language skills again, because your memory, your word memory is what there was until it stopped. So people who have been deafened in the workplace, you're looking at soldiers or people retired from the shipyards and everything. This is why I think, you know, Barrow and the West Coast are quite good, because they've grown up with a very strong, very large, hard of hearing population. So they're used to being more accessible, making things more accessible, whereas sort of the east of the county, if you will, we rarely divide it sort of east and west, do it? It's usually north and south. But if you have the east of the county, that generally doesn't see so much inclusion, and that's what was shared with me by the members. But they want to access arts. They're quite happy to pay for a coach and have a coach load of people go to an event in Carlisle. They go down to Preston on a regular basis, or they go to the Winter Gardens for shows there that are signed. They go up to Glasgow, get on the train together.
Did you say shows that are signed? Did you say shows that are signed? Yeah. Yeah.
Shows that are signed, or those that have closed captions on them. You know, because you can do a panto with closed captions, you can do a comedy night with closed captions, or you can have an interpreter. We had our interpreter go to Brewery Arts Centre and sign for The Sound of Metal, which was a brilliant film. If you haven't seen it, I would highly recommend seeing Sound of Metal. It's about a drummer's journey into deafness, and it really does capture it well. So I want the money for the arts and culture sector that people who are deaf in Cumbria have to be spent in Cumbria wherever possible. You know, so the more we can do, if you've got any questions, I'll gladly answer them. And if ever you've got a project in mind and you say, right, can you just do a quick focus group for us and see what would make this more accessible? We'll gladly do that. We've got groups around the county. We've got premises in Barrow, premises in Kendal. And if ever you wanted to come and talk to the deaf community, we can bring them in.
Okay,
so to talk.
So let's just say, for the sake of argument, that it's going to cost money to make something more accessible. I mean, that's just, it doesn't always, but let's just say for the sake of argument, it does, because you've got to bring in, you know, someone to sign, or you've got to create the visual captions for your performance or whatever. Just again, this is a purely practical question. Is there money that you can access to help people to do that, or do they need to build that into their bids or their financial budget to incorporate that, if you see what I mean?
It's a 50-50 mix at the moment, that you need to build some into the budget, because then that ticks the accessibility route as well. But there are some arts funding available for disabilities that we can apply for directly. But we need to work with you, because like most things, it's about 6 to 9 month run time on these grants, because it's quarterly reviewed. So we'd need to know plenty of time in advance, but we're happy to work with that. But we're also doing a project in the moment to create what is normally called a crisis fund, but it's also to enable us to go and support at artistic events, whether it's a gallery performance and just a gallery exhibition where someone can sign what the images are, or trying to reflect. You know, everything. It could be as simple as that, or it could be, you know, the Kendal Mountain Mountain Literature Festival. Doesn't help when you're deaf and have a lisp. It really is difficult. So Danielle, I get the dyslexia thing. That maybe we could get one of the local deaf creatives in to actually read some of the poetry, or through signing. You know, it could be that we can get our community more involved, and that doesn't cost.
Yeah. So you're saying, and your organisation is a good way into that community. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Well, we've got contact with between 400 and 500 deaf community members on a regular basis, and that's growing. As Cumbria deaf traditionally was very much, you have to be profoundly deaf and only use BSL, but we're very much taking deafness as a whole, in that it could be a child with glue ear that can last for 12 months, or it could be you know, someone who's deaf in the workplace, or someone who's born profoundly deaf. Yeah, so we're trying to work with all, because it is challenging. Deafness can create great depression. The levels of depression, mental health issues, and suicide among the deaf community are double that of the hearing population.
Gosh.
And one of those ways, we all know this, art can change people. And I use art in the broadest sense. It can really make a difference. It can make people engaged. Art, therapy, creative outlet, all of these things. And that's why it's so important that we connect with people like yourself.
That was going to be my next question, which was, you know, so we had a big meeting about carbon zero Cumbria and sustainability a few weeks ago. And I think one of the things that came out of that was an agreement that absolutely art and culture can influence and be almost ambassadorial in changing attitudes, or at least throwing out questions to people. You know, it's got a role to play there. Do you think art and culture in Cumbria and beyond has got a role to play in changing attitudes towards deafness and disability, or do you think its role is much more just to be more accessible?
No, it's all encompassing. Art, we know, is all around us. We all have pictures up in our homes. We have music playing, and as Annie will testify from her eons of experience, is that music is transformational in people's lives, but also in communities, and it needs to work hand in hand. It has to be bring people to it, but also bring art to the people. It has to work both ways.
Okay. Please feel free to pop any questions or raise your hand. Amy's just putting in into chat there. A quiet corner would be amazing in more locations. Tell us a bit about why that's an interesting thing to think about.
What, Amy or me? Sorry.
You.
Oh,
Is it quiet? So I think sometimes, you know, again, I suspect that it's background noise and busyness that sometimes makes stuff less accessible to people who are hard of hearing or deaf. Is that right? Yeah,
absolutely right. Because probably as individuals, we've all been in airport lounge, restaurant. I mean, heaven forbid any of us have had to go into McDonald's more than twice in our life. But the cacophony that is created just by the general hubbub is huge. And you switch off, you stop listening. So you literally sit there and eat. And we know food is a good, you know, it's for the soul as well as the eye, unless you're in McDonald's. But if you're in a restaurant and you're literally sitting there to eat, you can't converse with anyone. It takes away half the experience. So to have these quiet corners would benefit, as I say, not only the deaf, it would benefit other people as well.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Jill and then Kate. Jill, off you go.
Sorry, whilst I catch up with your face, Jill.
You just have to come off mute, Jill.
Trying to. Sorry, I was hitting the wrong thing. Okay. Yeah. My mother became very deaf as she grew older, and we were contemplating getting a hearing dog for her. So I understand what happens, how the difficulties are for them, for people who become deaf, but don't begin deaf. But I used to work with a brilliant musician who had retrained as a teacher of the deaf. And she became the head of a junior school. And she was incandescent with rage when the special schools for the deaf were disappeared, more or less, because she said to expect to teach children born deaf in a hearing classroom by mainstream teachers was an almost impossible task, because she felt that a great deal of sophistication was needed to teach born deaf children, and that ordinary mainstream teachers did not have the skills to do it. I wondered what your response was to that, because you were not born deaf.
Yeah, no, I agree. And those in our community who were born deaf, they agree that the specialist teaching around deaf language, BSL, and deaf culture, because you're essentially learning a different language entirely. It's a different culture, because language forms part of our culture. If you're born in Ireland, speak Gaelic, your culture comes partly around your language, the songs you sing, the poetry you read, the language you talk with your peers. And that's why a deaf school for profoundly deaf, born deaf people is so important. It has to exist.
Yeah, it does.
But not the mainstream, what they call it, the integration that they're doing isn't working. Born deaf, profoundly deaf people, they're failing. They're about 3 to 4 years behind their peers. And especially when they're going into schools where you have a teaching assistant who maybe has level 2 BSL, when that child is speaking BSL at home every day, using it with their family, they are more competent in the language than the teaching assistant. So the teaching assistant is never ahead. They can never add value. And totally with your friend on that one.
Thank you.
Kate.
It's not a question really, it's just backing up what was being said really about quiet corners, and having done quite a lot around autism, and I'm really interested in how if you get it right for somebody who's deaf, you might also get it right for somebody who's autistic. And it makes me think that if you get it right for somebody who's autistic or somebody who's deaf, you might be getting it right for lots of other people as well who don't necessarily have a label. And I think it's about thinking just differently and realizing what a difference you can make with tiny adjustments. So I'm just fascinated by that, and I think it's a really important point.
Oh, thanks, Kate. Well, I also think people who are visually impaired, a quiet corner would benefit them because there's less distractions, because it is exhausting when you're having to compensate, if you will, for a loss of one sense. You then, I mean, our team, we generally finish at 3 o'clock. For those who work full time, I work full time. I finish at 3, I come home, I have my nanny nap because I'm exhausted from having to watch everyone. Imagine what's going on, lip reading people and just taking in the whole picture all day, and then reading lots of words and being online for this. You know, if I was doing 3 of these meetings in a day, I'd be shattered. And it's that sensory stimulation. So I have my nap, then get up and do another couple of hours, or I'll bank it and do it the weekends. But the hours will get done, but it's how you approach your day. It's different, but there's lots of reasons why quiet corners would suit people. And I think, you know, this is part of our vision to make Cumbria the most deaf aware county in England, because for visitors, residents and employees, it would make such a difference for all sorts of reasons.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Kate. Danielle, and then I'm going to ask Emma to tell us about the Harris Museum and Art Gallery in Preston, and then we'll come to Annie. So Danielle, Emma, Annie. Off you go, Danielle.
Hello. Do you think that since the first lockdown, do you believe that the deaf community and other disability groups, in your experience over the last nearly 2 years, do you feel like we're being more included and heard and included, and in a way that barriers are now being reduced to be welcomed in? I'm trying to get I had my words ready, but then it all went a bit wrong then, sorry.
Okay, so let me just check. So you want to see whether or not the deaf community now, because people have reflected on what wasn't so good for them. To be honest, no, it was, I saw one of the questions pop up about Rose on Strictly. Yes, there's greater awareness, but what people don't see is the amount that goes into supporting her on Strictly and the cost of it, which isn't accessible to most people in life. And this is the bit that people always forget, that supporting someone like that is intensive, requires an awful lot of time and money and training, because interpreters can only work for 20 minutes and then they have to swap over. So because if you're relaying language 2 ways, or if you're doing interpreting work and then actually doing conversational relay, it is, your head's going in every which way. I can only think in one direction. They're trying to teach me to sign at the moment, but I'm struggling with that. I'm getting there. I know the word for wine. That's the only one I need to know. But I think what is happening is groups, people, statutory bodies. Yesterday I was on with the Northwest Ambulance Service because there was a massive failing, their 999 text service. The last message on there for the operator, because you have to pre-register for it, and it says that you're deaf, which is why you're using the text service, said, we'll get the ambulance to phone you. So having gone through that in a state of trauma, so this is it. There's initial thought process goes in, but it's not been, the deal's not been sealed. The final action is trying to make that change.
Do you feel the barriers have been reduced, or do you think that the conversations, though, the barriers and the conversations about how the barriers can be reduced to include in the arts, culture and heritage sector, do you feel that that's now being more apparent to feel included?
Well, the thing is, with the arts have always been inclusive of everyone. They really have. I mean, you look at history, centuries, it didn't matter who you were, what you were. If you were creative, you could get involved, you know, and that's the one good thing about the arts, is that it has this open access and it can really be changing for everyone. And I think it's so important that we encourage the deaf community, who have sometimes shied away because they thought it wasn't accessible, is that we show them how accessible it can be.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Danielle. Emma, tell us about the Harris Museum and Art Gallery in Preston, which I'm going to say now I'm not familiar with, don't know much about. So tell us about that.
Okay, it was just to echo Kate's point in a way. I worked with the Harris on their redevelopment. It's actually closed now for whilst they redevelop the galleries. They got a big lottery grant, but they worked a lot with the deaf community in Preston, and with a lot of different sort of community groups with access needs to look at how to develop the spaces. And they have a health, they call it a health and well-being space, but this is Kate's point, that what works for one group can work for many different groups. So they've developed a quiet space in the galleries. They have sort of seating that kind of cuddles you, you know, seating that you sit in and you feel safe in, and it faces away from the hubbub and the entrances. They've worked really hard on that, and they're doing things like in the reception spaces, they're doing, I don't know how you think about this, Caroline, but they're doing videos of signing for deaf communities, rather than, as you say, having words on signs.
Yes.
They're having videos to welcome people, to show a welcome to begin with to people with hearing difficulties. So I think they've done some really interesting work with the deaf community, you know. That's
it. That sounds fantastic, Emma. One of the projects we're working with a group at the moment is to do QR codes that access to the BSL little clips, so that it's not taking up space or technology within the gallery itself, and it's all done online then. So it makes it easy, and people literally go around, if they're interested in something, QR code, and then up comes a sort of 30-second video. That's it. And so it's really cost effective. It doesn't take much to do. So
as you said, it's thinking about it when you're planning the spaces, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
no, that's brilliant work.
Sounds really progressive, doesn't it? Annie, over to you. If you come off mute.
Thank you. Good to hear you, Caroline, and
you too,
well done for your passion. You reminded me of a story of one of our little girls who was deaf, and she used to lie on the floor. Well, she lies on the floor, and we had a visitor who complained and said how appalling we were letting this little girl lie on the floor. I said, actually, if you lie on the floor, you will hear what she's hearing from the vibrations of the heart. And it's just trying to increase people's awareness. We had another wonderful young girl, deaf, who used to sing songs following me lip reading from the front row, and the audiences didn't know she was deaf. And she actually met with Jack Ashley, the MP who was deaf, to try and increase deaf awareness in schools. But my main question, Caroline, is we have a building which we're proud of, which is acoustically neutral, because we worked with a professor of acoustics for 2 years to try and get it right. And I think it'd be wonderful if you had the money, the finances, to hold a training course for architects, so that they could make sure that every building that they now design is fit for people who are deaf.
Or even if they included some element of that in their design, because obviously some buildings need the acoustics, but some spaces could benefit from that neutral sound. And I totally understand the girl lying on the floor, because they explain it. If people lay in the bath and they've got the radio on, you can, if you lay in the bath with your head underwater, you can still actually hear the radio.
Right.
And people suddenly go, oh yeah, you know, never thought of it. You know, and it's just trying to explain to people there are different ways of hearing and feeling sound.
Yes.
You know, we've got a group that's starting to do drumming, because they can feel the vibrations. They can't necessarily hear the sound, but they can feel the vibrations. So it feels good. It feels uplifting.
Yeah.
And that's it, you know.
Thank you, Annie. We'll come to
and see
Maggie, and then probably the last question will be Ian. But first of all, Tina's just put in chat, Caroline. Tina is from Multicultural Cumbria. What sort of percentage of the deaf communities that you work with are from ethnic minorities or multicultural diasporas?
There's only actually three individuals that we engage with, so it's very small. But that is an equal reflection of Cumbria in many ways.
Okay, all right. I hope that answers your question.
Sorry, could I just say, I would probably say that doesn't reflect the multicultural community. I think that it's just more difficult to reach people, and they're perhaps not coming forward. So maybe there are more there that you don't know about.
We're certainly working on it. We're working with various groups.
I'd love to talk to you at some point about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That would be great, because we also have BSL signs in Arabic, Muslim, for prayer time as well. So we've got access to all that language skill as well.
Well, listen, part of the point of this network is just to connect people. So if you two have a conversation after this, that's great. Maggie, what would you like to say?
Sorry, just briefly, I was kind of echoing a little bit what Kate said, because I know one of my favourite restaurants locally, it's impossible to hear anything that is going on, especially for me, because I do have a bit of an impairment. But when I spoke to the manager of the restaurant, he said that lots and lots of people had said the same thing. And what I felt was, one thing I just quickly wanted to say was, my grandfather and my mother were both profoundly deaf, and then I got an issue early-ish in life. And I think that I thought the Deaf Association was for them because they were profoundly deaf, and didn't really think of it for me. And I just wanted to say that it's almost like it needs to be called the Hearing Association rather than the Deaf Association, because it's almost like we all need to hear better. We all need to listen. We all need to listen more to what other people say, and we all need to hear more. And it's strange how the word deaf kind of makes you feel, like that's not me, even when it is, actually, even when it is. And also it's not, it kind of, I don't know. I just wondered, Caroline, is there any other way of including the rest of the population, including the ageing population, to kind of be more part of your society?
Well, we have plans for next year to do more inclusive activities about listening well, and part of that's going to be a project delivered through football clubs and football grounds is Do You Hear Me Now? Right. And also we're doing a project through schools about helping maybe potentially grandparents. We're going to do a Wear It Loud Day to encourage the wearing the bright colours, but then there'll be activities to go alongside it. So we are trying to gradually get the message out, because I've come in, Maggie, I share your opinion entirely, and that's why we're trying to move in that direction. So any ideas, any actions would be great.
I like wearing it loud. That sounds great for me, since I do fashion.
Maybe I should
get involved.
I remember one of your presentations very well. I came away inspired.
Oh dear. I thought we.
All right, that's enough of the loving. Hang on. Okay. Final question. And by the way, Carol, my final question to you is going to be about, so what are the plans for the future? But Ian, you've got your hand raised. What would you like to say?
Yeah, so this is a bit of a well, I don't know how it will get answered, or if anybody else might chip in with an answer. The thing that puzzles me is that, and I know you said you don't sign, Caroline, that sign language never seems to be an absolute translation of the written English. And so, you know, and I'm not suggesting it should be, but what's behind that is the thought that I wonder whether the experience that somebody is getting is the same as if, for instance, if you're trying to interpret a piece of writing. You know, that thing about the poem the writer writes is not necessarily the poem the reader reads. I don't know if you're aware of that quote. Sorry, I'm realizing I'm not looking at the camera and therefore you maybe can't read my lips properly. Have you caught what I said or not?
Yeah, I've been able to follow what you've said.
Right, sorry. So I wonder if there's something for artists generally, but I'm thinking from a writing point of view for myself, that we need to kind of almost explore how you make sure that when it becomes translated, it still means what you think it means.
Okay, yeah, I mean, that goes back to the point I said earlier, that people who are born profoundly deaf and have signed all their life. BSL is very basic in that it uses words as individual words. It doesn't create long sentences with flowery language. The verbosity is lost in it, and that's actually a really good thing. And in, again, referring back to autism, that people who have some autistic traits, they're very direct and to the point, and that's how BSL is. So it captures what you need to convey. So, you know, there is probably about 3 signs for love, but they all mean different love, because it saves you having to say, oh, it was like romantic love, platonic love. It just has 3 different signs. So you lose extra words. So, you know, it would be a really interesting piece to see getting people to write deaf poetry or perform it and then write it in English, but then do English written poetry and then have it translated into BSL and see what the language looks like.
That would be fascinating. That would be fascinating. Ian, thank you for that very thoughtful remark. Thank you. Jonathan's just put in chat there, I'm 60 and find that people mumble more today. I have hearing aids, which I don't find helpful, but I am looking forward to using them at the Beggars Theatre in Millom, which now has a hearing loop. So that's great news. And obviously Jackie is often on this call from the Beggars. So that's great. And Jonathan, I hope it's a good experience for you. So Caroline, you've done it, you've been there for a year. What are the plans for the future? I think, you know, you've got quite ambitious plans in the arts and culture sector as much as any other sector. So tell us just briefly what the plans are going forwards.
Okay, as I said, we've got BSL Comedian coming next summer for our 130th anniversary. We're looking at doing a weekend-long festival, and festival in the true sense of it: music, comedy, arts, sculpture, live performance, everything. And that's to be for, you know, it's an integrated event, we're hoping. We're about to put tender out in January, February for an arts project coordinator for that. So that'll be to deliver for 2023. And don't worry, nobody has to sign to do that role. We have interpreters who can work for that, so don't worry about it. But keep an eye out for that piece of work that we'll be putting out for tender, because we want it to be inclusive and we don't want to be deaf specific. We don't want to be hearing specific. So we're going to do lots of activities that work one way or the other and need interpreting both ways. So that should be a lot of fun, and we're working with theatres and cinemas and trying to get more performances signed. And equally, if everyone has induction loop, which is great for hearing aid users, although a lot more hearing aids are being done on Bluetooth, so you're going to have to start looking at Bluetooth systems rather than the old loop system. We can work with you to give you some guidance on that, and that's absolutely fine. And we just want to get our deaf community going out and reaching out and seeking out art, because, like I said before, it is good for their soul.
Okay.
And they know it, but they just didn't know how to access it well. And that's what we want to do, is how well they can access it. If we can help, we want to make that happen.
Well, let's stay in touch with you, Caroline. Please put your contacts into chat so people can pick those up if needs be. And let's keep the conversation going, because I think this is a really important thing. And again, a role that Network can play in getting the word out, but just getting us to think differently and asking ourselves questions about this.
No, thank you for having me this morning.
Pleasure. And by the way, any conversation that helps us start thinking about the difference between hearing and listening is a really important conversation to have, from my perspective. I love the thinking about the difference between hearing and listening. So thanks once again for your time, Caroline. And as I said, do put your contacts into chat, and I'm sure we'll stay in touch with you. And thanks to everybody for your contributions about that as well. That was a really interesting conversation.
Thank you.
Right. Well, let's now go to Grisdale, where Lorna has been sitting patiently in her car, where she has got little power. So Lorna, just while I get your slides up, just tell us what's going on with you and power and kind of the last 6 days. What's it been like?
Yeah, well, they're saying it might not be till next week now, but I mean, it's fine really. I've got a wood burner, so I'm warm and I can cook. And I'm quite enjoying the hibernation really, of like not having any internet or phone and not being able to do anything that involves electric. Is quite nice in a way.
All right. Well, I hope it comes back when you want it to come back, and I hope it doesn't get too cold. But great to hear that you've got a wood burner and that you're cozy. Right, I'm going to share my screen, and I've got the slides that you sent me. So Lorna, if you'd like to just take it away, introduce yourself, and just tell us a bit about what you do and how you do it.
Yeah. So I'm Lorna. I make baskets. I call them Spelk Baskets. They're also known as swills, but Spelk is the sort of dialect word for splinter, in case you didn't know that. So these are basically made out of strips of wood rather than like round bits of willow or grasses or other things that baskets can be made of. So I make them out of oak and also hazel, but oak mostly. And it's a critically endangered craft. There's only 2 of us in the world that are making them full time, and there's another 2 people that can make them part time. And it's really specific to like the Furness Fells area of Cumbria, where there's a lot of oak, and our woodlands have been managed with coppice here for centuries. So yeah, so that's the basket. Next slide, please, Tom. So yeah, this is a coppice woodland where I get all my material from. So I actually manage the woodland, fell all the trees and process them all to the point of getting being able to weave a basket. So why oak? It's a really durable material, it's really strong, but I mean historically it was basically whatever you had to hand you would make a basket from, and we've got a lot of oak. So yeah, I mean, and the woodlands have been coppice like this for centuries by humans, but also it's possible that it's imitating nature of like having big fauna. Is that the right word? Fauna, yep. So like my prop fell over. So like big like elephants and mammoths and stuff would roam through the countryside and knock trees down, and so they learned to regenerate and grow back again when this light was created in the woodland, and humans are basically just imitating that. Sorry, there's a bit of like electricity van movement going on outside, a bit distracted. Yes, so next slide, please, Tom. So what is coppicing? Coppicing is taking a tree and cutting it right down to as close as you can to the ground, usually over winter when the sap is down, and then it springs back with new growth, and these all compete and grow up to the light and grow really long straight stems, which are really useful. And throughout history, humans have used this technique to grow nice straight timber that's basically renewable. You can cut it on a cycle and keep on going. Yeah, so next slide. So the other products, as well as baskets, I have to cut the whole area. So any trees that aren't useful for baskets have to get made into something. So this is peeling oak, which we do in spring, and that goes to a tannery in Devon that use it to tan leather. And next slide, please. And this is the peeled oak stems, which we kind of, there isn't really a market for these days. So if any of arty groups would like them, we're always interested in new uses for these. They're really sculptural and beautiful when the oak's peeled, and could be really good for like set design or events, or yeah, anything really. Historically they were used for making sort of rustic furniture and garden furniture, but that market's gone now really. Next slide. And yeah, things like benches out of the larger timber that's no good for baskets as well. Next one, please. So I'm trying to rush through because I'm aware there's not much time. So yeah, historically, swill, the name swill comes from the use on Morecambe Bay for collecting cockles. And the cockles were flicked into the basket, and then they would dig a hole in the sand nearby, which would fill with water, and then they would swill it out to wash all the sand away and the mud away, and leave the cockles. So that's where the name swill comes from. They were also used everywhere and anywhere really that you needed to carry things before we had plastic bags. So they were used a lot in industry and farming. For a lot of farmers still call them tatty baskets when they see them at shows. And they were used on steam trains and steamships for transporting coal. They were used in all the mills, the bobbin mills. In the snuff factory in Kendal, they still have some in there. They still use them, I think. Yeah, so they sort of declined slightly after the war with the introduction of like plastics and metal. Next slide, please. So today they're mostly domestic uses, really. These are a range of my baskets used for sort of laundry, firewood, logs, foraging, garden products. And then I make the ones at the back as a sort of adaptation of a hunting backpack, which is a sort of finely finished to make a handbag. Yeah, I also make lighting and like screens. So recently I've just done a kitchen, woven around a kitchen unit to screen it off. It's just such a beautiful material in itself. There's loads of grey colours in it and different colours, and like knots and little wiggly bits, and it's just really beautiful to look at in itself. So quite often weave like just wall pieces to go on the wall like art. Next slide, please. Oh yeah, so that's just this. I had intended to do this talk from my workshop so you could see a bit of the space, but you'll have to put up with these beautiful pictures rather than the gritty reality, the messy reality of my workshop. So I make other things such as these flowers as well, that I sell a lot from my studio as well. Next slide, please. So it's really about like making the most of nature, and this is, so the wood is all split down the grain, so you're really constantly working with nature rather than dictating what you want it to do. Really, you've got to work with what it's got. Next slide. So yeah, the material is soaked in the beck as well, so this sort of creates this real connectedness to the water levels and the beck, and constantly aware of that without really thinking these days, and whether or not my material is going to be there when I go to get it or if it's washed away. Next slide, please. And yeah, it's mostly hand tools are used, apart from I do fell trees with a chainsaw initially. Next slide, please. So after all that, finally I actually get to weave the basket, which is like the least amount of work really in the making of a basket. Yeah, next slide. So, and these are the Hazel baskets, which are found a lot across Europe, and it's currently having a bit of a resurgence in the UK. But I really enjoy, my background's in archaeology and anthropology, so I really enjoy traveling around and seeing what different styles baskets people have in different countries. And this one's a little Romanian berry basket for picking berries in the mountains. Next slide. Oh yeah, I was supposed to put a different slide in here, but I forgot to change it at the last minute. So this week, the point of this talk really was that this weekend we were going to have open studios. There's 6 of us at Grisdale now: a printmaker, a potter, a musical instrument restorer, a furniture maker, and a lady who makes really big plant pots, amazing colourful plant pots. So it's really nice creative community that's building up. Sadly, we think the studios are probably not going to happen this weekend because of power outage, but it'd be really nice to see people in the future. We're always open if we're working in there. Yeah, I think that's me really. Thank you. Thanks, Tom.
What beautiful images! What beautiful images, Laura. And I think we've got a real sense of the skill involved in that kind of thing, and to know that you're one of 2 people in the world that's still doing this kind of work is extraordinary. So so it's terrible to hear that the studios probably open studios won't happen because of the power, but totally understandable. If people wanted to get stuff from you, Lorna, and buy your work, where can they do that?
Well, my website, which is in the chat, I think someone's put it in the
Amy
chat.
just put that in there. Yep.
Yeah. But also, so I'm on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, Lorna Weaves Oak. So I really like meeting people as well. So if people want to come and just pop into the workshop and see what I'm doing, I have other things in the workshop that I don't have on my website as well. So, and then next weekend I'm at a Christmas fair at Rydal Mount, the 11th and 12th as well. So I'll be there.
Well, the Christmas fair at Rydal Mount sounds great already, but the fact that your work is going to be there makes it even more special. So what beautiful, as people are saying, Maggie's just put wonderful work and process, Lorna, and Jonathan's just put in there beautiful swills. Hot curried nuts work well on top of a log burner in a dry frying pan, in brackets.
Oh, top tips,
at a winter power cut party, the drinks are nicely chilled. Thank you so much for sharing that with us this morning, Lorna. And it's a beautiful thing. I had no idea about the existence of a basket weaver or the specific type of basket weaver that you are until I came across what your work was. So it's lovely to be introduced to that kind of thing as well. And it's just part of the rich tapestry of the culture and art scene here in the fine county of Cumbria. So thank you for also making the effort of getting that stuff together this week when it can't have been easy to do, and for sitting in the car in a car park with an electricity van trundling around in front of you and sharing that with us this morning. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Tom.
Right, we're coming up to 10:30. It's 10:28. Kate, did you have any thoughts just to share with us before we finish?
I do. I have 3 things to say this morning from the chair. Well, in addition to those 3, just thank you so much to Caroline and Lorna. What a lovely morning it's been. Thank you. The first thing I wanted to say is that that Cumbria Arts and Culture Network tries very hard to provide training on the little bit of money that we have, and I hope that going forward we will be able to do some disability awareness training. Is something that I'm just about to start to arrange for the museums that I work with. It's a piece of training that I've done before, and it's excellent, and I am hoping to roll it out much more widely across the network. So let's look out for that. Don't forget, on the 14th of December between 10 and 12 in the morning, there is an audience insights session being delivered in partnership with us, but by the audience agency, all about Cumbrian audiences. So if you work in community or audience engagement in this part of the world, please do sign up for that. It's free, and it's going to be a really unique little occasion when we get insights into our audiences as never before. So Amy is going to put the link in chat if she hasn't already. So that
quite a few signed up already, I think, aren't there?
Yeah, 46 signed up already. So I'm really chuffed about that. Let's keep going because there's plenty of scope for more. The date is the 14th of December. And finally, it's nearly Christmas. So we have our final Christmas party session on the 17th of December, so in 2 weeks' time. Not going to tell you what it's going to consist of, but just to reassure you that we're cooking up something special. So please do join us, and please be ready to come along with your homemade festive decorations. We want only those things that are beautifully homemade and sustainable, or even not beautifully homemade, just homemade.
In the spirit of sustainability, you mean? Exactly. So my stashes of fairy lights don't count then?
I'm afraid they don't, nor do the silver shiny things and stickers and all the rest of it. No, we want lovely oak, beautiful things made at home. Okay, so that's the 17th of December. Please join us. Tom, that's all from me. Thank you.
Great. So next week we've got someone from the Arts Council talking to us about the myriad or the changes, the tweaks to the grant applications that they've announced recently. And the NPO round starts soon for bigger organisations. But we've asked someone to come along to talk to us about how that is working out as far as the Arts Council. So who's it's coming, Kate? Can you remember?
It's somebody called Holly Clark, and she's going to come and talk to us about the changes that are being made to project grants specifically. So that's really important, just announced. Please do listen up to that.
Yeah, so that's next week. And also a gentleman from the National Trust whose name
John Moffat. John
there you
Moffat
go.
from the National Trust.
There's a really interesting project that they are embarking upon next year with the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, and we're going to hear about that and see where that is all going as well. So it should be a really interesting week next week, as well as obviously this week has been fascinating with Caroline. Thank you again, Caroline, for your time this morning, and to Lorna. It's an amazing county in which we live, but if we can make things more accessible to everybody, and if we can all go, Lorna's just popped into the chat there as well. She also does demonstrations, bar mitzvahs, and talks in person, if anyone wants to get in touch. So I could definitely see a demonstration of Lorna weaving her magic as a fascinating thing to do and to watch and to observe, and probably purchase stuff at the end of it as well. Good luck with the Rydal Hall show, Lorna, next week. All right, thanks everybody for your time this morning. Really nice to see everybody. Have a good weekend, and catch you again next Friday morning, same time and same place. Cheerio.